We're into the second module. Time flies when you're having fun. 2A, we're going to study the art and science and art of prompt engineering today. That's the topic. And we'll do that by looking at the composition of prompts. We'll look at some of the more popular prompting techniques. Start to get underneath the primordial substance, the most basic substance in a large language model, which is the token. So we'll think about tokens on a budget, because they're not infinite tokens to be spread around. And then we'll look at some of the challenges in prompting. So if someone could come up and write the random word of the day on the board. I'm curious if it's serendipity, again, as we saw. So if you got it, just don't be shy, get up and bring it to the front. Hopefully you've gotten through quizzes 3 and 4, and we'll go over the answers there. And also read this chapter on prompt engineering. For homework, take the quiz for prompt engineering and get yourself an account, because next week we're going to do some prompting. We're going to do some experimenting, in a lab, quote unquote, situation. It doesn't have to be ChatGPT. Again, I told you last time, I like Perplexity AI. In fact, I just saw something pop up from Perplexity that if you have a .edu email address, you get some free time on their higher end service. And if we get 5,000 NC State students, it's free for a year for the whole school. So I'm not quite ready to do a campaign yet for them, but there's others out there. In fact, it would be good if not everyone was using ChatGPT, so we can do some comparisons on the results. All right, any photos or anything, you want to send them to me. It always, at a minimum, amuses me, and thank you for your photos. I looked over them. I'm getting better. I'm not quite at 100%. I'm not quite at 50%, but I'm close. So thank you for that. So again, today we're going to look at the effective prompting and learning the techniques for crafting effective AI prompts. We'll have a little fun along the way, like we try to do as usual. We'll watch a video. We'll hear from Pato AI from the book, and will take us through some of the core concepts, including some of the prompt engineering techniques, prompting issues, or things that you should be aware of, and a few things in between. I believe, I don't know where you stand on this, but I believe prompting is the new Googling. And this may have been a more profound statement only a year ago, but with Gemini is now built into Google. So when you're Googling, you're prompting. Huh, okay, but it's true. The two have now been interwoven. And I'll show you a couple examples as we go along. I will argue that prompting, now that many of the chatbots have web search built into them, you're going to see, I think it's a much more efficient way of searching the web and having it presented to you in a more consumable fashion. So prompt engineering, one definition is the practice of designing and refining. In fact, my coding style is typically start with a blank editor and start debugging the program into existence. So if you're anything like me, where you prefer quicker iterations, you don't want to overly think the architecture, you get inspiration by seeing things work. Well, the refining part is as important as the designing. We're going to talk a lot about designing. Next week, we'll talk a little bit more about refining, but the two go very well together. And I would say it is an iterative sport. It's all about getting the AI model, whatever type it is. We typically use language models as the example, but there are many other type of models, like image models, etc. The goal is to elicit a response from the model. And again, these are typically generative models. So a model that we're doing linear regression on, we probably are not going to try to elicit a response. We're going to plug in data and get a response. So this is typically for generative models. And we want our response to be relevant, accurate, and in the tone that we desire. Okay? So that's kind of a definition of prompt engineering. Let's start off by seeing an example. And this would be an example that I would say prompting over Google search. You can probably find this answer. So how much does a prompt engineer make these days? Notice I didn't say what day it was. And it correctly came back and said for 2024, which was the search it is. So entry levels, 60 to 80K a year, mid 80 to 120, senior 175 to 240, average salary 146K per year, and about $70 per hour. Not too bad. But if you're at the top of the market and then find yourself in a market like New York or California, you're talking about $500,000 a year. And I saw recently, who was it? Someone put an ad out for $960,000 a year job, right? So, but notice how this prompt, and I really like this new feature that some of the models include. When they do a search, they're going to use this thing that we call RAG, and we're going to have a whole class on that, so don't burden yourself with it, but it goes out, it'll do a web search. Based on the prompt, it decides that the web search is the right thing to do. It does a web search, it gets a slew of responses, it processes the responses, and it says, okay, for the top earners, we went to AIjobs.net. That's where we got. You can click on this, and you can find the reference. So, again, I like prompting over Googling, so to speak, or raw web searching because of this. Now, ethically and accurately, 2 years ago, I wouldn't have said this because I would have said, how do you know 500K annual is the right salary? Well, now with this new feature, it adds a reference, right? So you can see a little bit why I think prompting is the new Googling, and with the new Google, you get prompting. So maybe it's a moot point. This picture, I was trying to describe prompt engineering when I was writing the book, and this prompt came to mind, and I popped it in there, and I got this wonderful picture back, and it made it into the book. But prompt engineering, to me, can feel sometimes like you're wrestling a robotic alligator. What do I mean by that? You ever play hot and cold or hot potato or whatever that is where you get blindfolded and you say, okay, more to the right, you're getting warmer, oh no, colder, oh no, they go to slow. So you're giving instructions, and you have to think from the person's perspective. What are they thinking? Maybe what about their background will make them respond to a certain word? And sometimes not knowing the full context of the model, it does feel like a struggle to get it to give you the response that you want. So having a technique is probably not a bad idea. And that's kind of the nature of this class. Yeah, it's always going to feel a little bit about wrestling. There'll be a little give and take there, but we want to do it with a plan. And the reward, it can be as gratifying as instantaneously locating Waldo in a complex array of images without any guidance. You all know what the Waldo reference is? Where's Waldo? All right, good. So that's the upside. Sometimes when you have that well-crafted prompt and you pop it in and you get that output, you're like, damn, this is pretty good. I can get on to doing something, important. You've just deburdened me, so now I've saved the time. I can do something important with that time. Or I can just go watch Netflix with the time and relax and recharge my batteries. Equally important. So you met Pato AI. Any of you speak a little Spanish?
Pato?
Yeah.
Pato? Yeah.
What does that mean? Yeah.
What
else?
I was thinking that when I saw Pato AI, I was like thinking, is that Pato AI?
Yeah.
I was thinking that.
Yeah.
I wasn't too sure.
So if you would ask, or ask Pato, tell you a little bit about itself. And I think it's important to introspect, to know your model. And Pato is a language model. Now, if you start asking it to generate pictures, may not be that good at it. And in particular, this is the model that was trained by Jane Miguel and Ernestine on environmental sustainability. And the reason why, other than grins, to put this up here, is to say, know your model. Understand where it came from. Now, GPT-4, Perplexity, and many Claude, and many models out there that are immense. So asking it where you came from, it may not even be able to answer. But Pato is a more modest model. If you read in the book, it started from a medium-sized model, Falcon, and it was trained from there. So the first point, when you're doing prompt engineering, know the limitations. Know what your model asks. This is not an unreasonable prompt to start off with. Tell me a little bit about yourself, and you'll get some hints. And maybe this is the implied technique, is when in doubt, ask the AI model. Like, oh, I need to come up for this test the perfect prompt to do this. So I can ask AI, well, AI, if you were me, how would you craft this prompt? I do that a lot. And sometimes it comes back with, this is garbage. And sometimes it comes back, oh, 90% of it's garbage. I like that 10%. I'll add that to what I was thinking. And now you're 10% better off than you were before. All right, so tell me a little bit about yourself. Know your model. So if we were to ask Pato, can you explain how you process prompts and generate responses? So maybe another thing that would be helpful is what happens when I issue that prompt into your language model? What does it do? What does it do in the next millisecond? You know, it does something. So can you explain it? So Apollo's going to explain. Well, like before we get going, remember, I'm only going to be as good as my training. So, and I happen to have trained on language patterns and context from an extensive text data set, and in particular around sustainability, but that's irrelevant from this point on. So next, I break down your prompt. I analyze it by breaking it down into tokens and to capture its intent. And we're going to talk about tokens in a second, so just hold that thought. So it breaks it down into machine consumable from text to numbers. That's another way to think about it. Then I start a prediction cycle. I'm going to predict calculating probabilities of what the next word is going to be based on prior words in the sequence. So I start playing this game of predict the next word, and that's where the fun starts. The model starts using these things called weights. And each token will have weights, or groups of tokens in the neural net will have weights. The higher the weight, the more likely it will influence the outcome. Right? So the notion of tokens or groups of tokens that have weights in the neural network. And then I select the next word, aiming for the highest probability while ensuring creativity. And so now it gets a set of options, and it says, okay, based on the following criteria, I'm going to pick this as the most likely next word. So when you're seeing a response come, now sometimes when it's being typed out like I'm doing, it's like a typewriter, it's not doing that. It's not like putting every word out and then figuring out what the next word in its memory cache. It's saying, I think this is a candidate. It's going back and it's fixing things along. Oh, that was biased. Let me go back and fix that a little bit. So it's doing adjustments as it comes up with that next word. And then it iterates. It goes through to what they call completion. So it goes until it feels your prompt, the request from your prompt has been completed, right? And it's keeping in mind the full context of your question. So you can get myopic if you're just looking a word at a time. So it's going back and recalculating the weights to say, hey, no, it's not just the best word after, one is two. No, there may be a better word to follow one than two, and based on the context, obviously. And also, a really good model won't just look at the context of your question and the answer, but it'll look at other questions, right? So if you start having a conversation and you say, I'm vegan, and then you keep doing Q&A, then you say, what should I have for lunch? It'll probably go back, and it can recommend anything for lunch, but in the context, in the prior conversation, it mentioned that's going to influence. That'll have a weight, and it'll influence the output from that previous response. All right? Then, ambiguity, multiple interpretations. So what you ask for might not be very clear. So going through this process to say, well, what would a standard answer based on what I was trained on look like to help break the ambiguity? So can I fill in some of the blanks on what they're asking for? Like when I said, these days, what should a prompt engineer be paid these days? It says, these days is ambiguous. So I'm going to need to figure out what day it is. So how am I going to do that? Maybe I'll do a web search to find out what day it is, right? You can see sometimes when you ask ChatGPT something it doesn't have the ability to do, it'll say, well, I know Python, and Python has a date time library or API. I'll create a little Python program, I'll execute it, get the date and time. So it's interesting how these models deal with ambiguity. And I can learn by integrating user feedback. I'm noticing this more and more with these tools. You see the yes or no, did that work or that didn't work? And I use those with caution because I happen to know that when you say yes, your input and output get committed to its training data. So, I like that. That worked out well. I answered that question well. But now, if you had your customer's bank account number in that question, ChatGPT now has that. So be careful. Normally, it shouldn't be saving your prompts unless you tell it to. But even if you don't tell it to, there are indirect ways. But feedback is an important way to get to improve. And then last, it has guardrails. It has some checks along the way, checking for ethical standards and things like, it's not going to have emotion. It's not going to have experience unless you train it to. So that's kind of a fly through of the 10 or so when a prompt is entered in, what's happening inside Pato AI's brain when that happens. So of course, I had to do this. I've created the mermaid JS diagram. So that's kind of a summary of it. So training from what it was learned, it analyzes by tokenizing your prompt, it calculates probabilities based on these things called weights, it selects the next word, it goes into a loop doing that until it's completed. It checks your context from the question and answer, but also the broader conversation that you might be having. It handles ambiguity and incorporates feedback. And then before output, it'll check for coherence, relevance, and ethical considerations. So that's what happens at a high level when a prompt is entered. Make sense? Okay. So now, here's an example prompt. And what we're going to do is we're going to slip a analyzer on top of it to really look at the DNA. What is this prompt made up of? And it turns out it's a fairly well-formed prompt. So, given the increased importance of environmental sustainability, suggest strategies, et cetera, et cetera. So there's the key, that's the DNA decoder, and we can now look at it. So the context is an important part of a prompt, having context, and this is given the increased importance of environmental sustainability. That's the context. So you're giving the model something to anchor into. The instruction, okay, you go and suggest strategies to reduce our company's carbon footprint. Okay, the input data is pretty weak, but you could imagine attaching a spreadsheet to this or more text, etc. But in this case, the input data is energy conservation and eco-friendly practices, and then the output indicators create a detailed action plan. And so that's, when you think about creating a prompt, these four things, in some shape, form, or size: what is the context, what is the instruction, what is the input data, and what is the output indicator. My favorite output indicator is 40 words or less. Or something, something, something in 40 words or less, because I want to see if it's even worth getting the whole. It's a detailed action plan. I don't want a detailed action plan. I want a summary of the action plan and then give me the detail. But so that's, if I were to put a prompt under a microscope and analyze its form, that would be it. Okay, so let's move on now to prompt techniques. So, Otto, tell us with the mermaid diagram the 5 essential prompt techniques. There's probably more than 5 essentials, but I'll fit it into a 50-minute class. The diagram highlights 5 essential prompt techniques. So clarity, ensuring your prompts are clear and specific. Excess, running on and on and on when you prompt is just going to confuse the model as to what you want. So avoid excess, exercise constraint, clear boundaries for conciseness and relevant answers. Balanced question, don't lead the witness with the answer, let it give you the answer. And then providing examples, known as shot prompting. And we'll go through it, we have a little video on that. Okay, oh, and if we were to add a 6th, it's going to be prepared to do those over and over and over again. And you'll learn, it'll learn, etc. Modulo the fact that there's a token budget that we'll get to. So you can't infinitely do this, and I'll explain what happens if you do keep doing it, and you may have run into this. But the 6th is probably the most important. Don't assume you're going to get the first answer the right time. You're going to learn, just like when you're playing hot and cold. More to the right, more to the left, thinking about how the person's thinking, seeing how they respond to your commands. You're going to make adjustments along the way. Okay? All good? So let's start with clarity. And what does clarity mean from a good and bad perspective? So start by ensuring your prompts are clear and specific. So this is pretty straightforward. Translate this sentence to French: good morning. That is simple as you get. And this is maybe dramatically bad, which is, tell me about France. You might get an example of good morning, but you probably won't. So this prompt is too vague and can lead to broad, unfocused responses. Now, if you want, if you're just brainstorming and you want to get some ideas, then it would be appropriate to do something that is broad and unfocused to start. All right, so that's the first one. Excess. How much detail is right? So focus on essentials and avoid unnecessary complexity. So list the benefits of renewable energy. That's a pretty straightforward. You can say list 5 things or list 3 things about benefits of renewable energy. And of course, too much. It's just do this and this and this and that. It's overloaded, unfocused again. And it'll overwhelm the model. Moving right along. Is this like obvious? It's obvious when you know it. And it's certainly obvious when you try it. You'll see right away. Oh, yeah. What did I even mean when I was asking that question? Exercise constraints, I think I mentioned this a few times. Manageable prompts, don't be afraid to set limits. Explain quantum computer in 40 words. That has limits. And then tell me about quantum computing. That would be something that really without limits. All right. And I always have like my Microsoft Word next to me, and I'm cutting and pasting these things. I'm trying to remember my prompts as well. There's prompt history, so you can kind of remember your prompts. But I am fully prepared that I'm going to be working this. Right? It's going to be an iterative coding, debugging type of situation. So what's balance? How do you balance non-biased questions? So aim for impartial, well-rounded responses. So non-biased. What are the arguments for and against a vegetarian diet? That would be something that's pretty balanced. And then here you're leading the witness. And that's, you might be trying to get, arguing with a carnivore saying, I got to give him a reason and help me give him that reason. That's fine. But when you give this reason, you've already biased it to that's going to be the answer. It's not going to come back and say, well, have you considered protein or this or that? It most likely won't do that if you're not prompting it. So beware, make it balanced, and don't lead the witness. And I cannot, I'll take part of the blame, but I'm going to include all of you in it. We can't help but to lead the witness. You almost sometimes want to say, I have this idea. Help me prove that this idea is right. Well, then say it that way to the model. Don't kind of beat around the bush to it. If you have an idea and you think it's right, it at least opens up the possibility of the model. The model will notice a little vulnerability on your part and say, well, I think you're right too. But at least it'll open it up. But if you say this is it, it will rarely contradict you. One of the best techniques to ground your prompt, to ground the model, is to give an example. To say, like this. Okay, you've now made it far less obscure. Now, that's what you're talking about. Gotcha. Now, generate a table. Okay, I'll generate a table. You may or may not like it. Generate a table with these column headers. Now, I got it. Right, so examples are a big deal. How many examples? 3. I don't know. This 1 to 3 is usually good. When you get beyond 3, you got to really think about what you're trying to do. You're trying to train it. Maybe you shouldn't be using prompting. But there are a few styles, a few shots. 0 shot is no examples. You just, what's the meaning of life? Get an answer. And you may like it. I think you're setting yourself up for a follow-on prompt with that. So model will take its best guess. 1 shot, 1 example as context. My favorite type is 1 shot, and then shots, 2, 3, 4, 5 examples. There are some uses for that, as we'll see. All right, I want to switch to a video here. And I follow this guy all about AI. I thought I'd feature him in the class and maybe even tell him someday that he's being featured in the class to tell you about and give you an example of shot prompting.
I want to create a video about prompting in ChatGPT and GPT-3 and show the difference between 0 shot, 1 shot, and few shot prompting, because they're very useful things you can do with these different techniques. Anyways, let's just dive in. So let's start off by looking at 0 shot prompting. This is where the model, that in this case is ChatGPT, is just guessing its best effort without having seen any examples of the results you really want beforehand. So let's just head over to ChatGPT and do an example of a zero-shot prompt. Okay, so let's say my plan is that I want a prompt that I can use in Midjourney for an image. So I just write an image description with adjectives and nouns of a female cyborg walking in winter landscape in Norway. So here the ChatGPT 3 or the model doesn't know anything about exactly what kind of results I want. So all that it's doing here is just guessing, or it's trying to figure out, okay, so this input, okay, so I guess I gotta give back this then. It doesn't really know what I want exactly, so it's just guessing, but it's very good at it. And as you can see here, this is a very good guess of what I really wanted, but it's not exactly what I wanted. So I'm gonna see how we can do something about that. But anyway, let's just copy this, head over to Midjourney, paste this prompt anyway, just for fun, and see what we get back and compare it with the other ones. So we are back at the slide again, and now let's have a look at what one-shot prompting is. Here you can see that the model is given just one example of the result you want, or what we want. So if we head over to ChatGPT now and give it an example of what exactly we want and see what we get back then. Okay, so now let's give ChatGPT one example of what exactly is that we want. This is the format I want the result in. I want it just the adjectives and nouns, and at the end I want this aspect ratio that we can use in Midjourney. You can see I give it an example here of what the result I want. And now let's try to run that again and see what we can get back. You see now, it's really trying, like, it's much better. You see it's much more compressed than it was before. It's almost perfect. You see it's missing this one, but I gotta say that was very good for just a one-shot example. Let's copy that and head over to Midjourney, just paste this as a prompt too and see what we get back. And finally, let's have a look at a few-shot solution. So as we can see here, the few-shot prompting is give the model a small number of examples of the results you want. So what you're gonna do now is give ChatGPT, I guess 3 examples of the results we really want. So here you can see, now we give it, you can see there's 1, 2, and 3 examples here of what the results we really want is. And let's see if something changes now. It should do based on my experience. So yeah, you can see it starts with the same, and hopefully we get this aspect ratio at the end here. Yeah, so this was as expected, but it's a very useful way to do things if you are out after a really specific output. So let's just copy this, head over to Midjourney, and also paste this here. So yeah, I hope this was quite, as you can see here, like we started with a zero shot here. Now the model didn't know anything about what we really wanted. It just guessed. Then we gave it a small hint here with one shot. And finally, we tried to really spoon feed it like, this is what we want. We want this kind of output in this format. And it gave us that. So hopefully you understood that. Finally, let's compare the 3 images from Midjourney. Okay, so here are the images we got back from Midjourney. There's nothing really much to say here. I think they all look good. And that's giving a lot of credit to Midjourney, because remember the one on the left, the zero shot one, was just a wall of text. And it came out pretty good if you compare it to the one on the few shot one, which I think was my favorite. But it's not a lot separate from the zero shot. So I think Midjourney did a very good job.
All right, let's break that down a little bit. So what he was trying to do was give some hints or examples to create an instruction for creating an image in Midjourney. Midjourney is an open source image model that you can do similar things to what he just did. I thought it was interesting that he was doing an intermediate step, which is he had the instruction. I don't know why he didn't just put the instruction into Midjourney, but he used GPT, which is a language model that excels at creating concise language outputs. So he used it and he created a instruction and did it 3 times, each with more examples. I mean, I'm not I'm not sure about the context of, as he said, to him, the three look pretty good. Each of them look pretty good. But I think what you can see is at each time there was something like he wanted aspect ratio. And in the first one, they couldn't guess the aspect ratio, but in his example it had. And then when he did it 3 times, that, and only then did it say, I better add this. I think that's something the person wants in his image instruction. Right? So I hope that gives you a view of shot prompting, 1, 3, 0, etc. Any questions on shot prompting? Have any of you ever used that term before, and shot prompting? In circles, in AI circles, it's not cool to say, you don't say that I prompted, I issued a prompt. It's like I did a 0 shot to whatever, or I did a 1 shot to this model. And so you might hear that in a hallway. People like to say shots. So we should play a shot game where we all take a shot when we say shot prompting. But anyway, this is a pretty practical example. And this is a labeling and categorizing text. You can imagine stereotypically, this is, I see examples with email spam. We say, this is a subject line for an email that's spam, etc. And I did this around sustainability. So buying bulk food in single-use plastic containers, not sustainable. So I give 4 examples like this, and I say, okay, drum roll. What are you going to do with this? Upgrading to a high-efficiency gas furnace in a cold climate, and it's going to come back with sustainable, right? So you give it some examples, it gets it right. You're going to see when we get to the machine learning that when there are subtleties and domain nuances, like in law or in environmental studies, where things could be more nuanced, you want to train the model. You don't want to just give it some examples. You actually want to go through some training, because what's happening here is the model isn't really inferencing on this data. So this data isn't burnt into its neural net. So it can't infer these answers. It's using prediction to get these answers. So when you train, it's now burnt into the model. It's actually now something the model does indigenously. It can think, can create creative answers based on that training. Right? But again, this is, I think, a good example of NSHOT. All right. So one more time, let me mention this notion of iterative prompting, because it was the 6th one, and it's worth call out. So it's critical in prompt engineering. I said it's like wrestling with AI, refining and adjusting the prompts to guide AI towards a desirable outcome. And the back and forth helps in fine-tuning the responses. It helps in fine-tuning the person behind the keyboard, to ask better questions and to make the process more dynamic and effective. So next week, when we do our prompt lab, we'll be going into a bit of that. All right? So I'm going to remind you, again, I'd love for you to participate. So have something on your laptop or on your phone where you can pop prompts in and get answers. All right? Now, let me talk a little bit about tokens. A token is a numeric representation of data that goes into a model. And when your prompts are tokenized, it's kept in the model's memory. And the model could only hold so many tokens in its memory. Like you'll see that, I'm not sure, I think ChatGPT, this time last year was 8K tokens. I think now it's closer to 32K of tokens that it can keep that. And it's, the analogy that people use is memory has been spilt. meaning some of your older context, your older prompts are no longer in its memory. The test that I like to do is my name is Jerry. So I'll start off a prompt session and say, my name is Jerry. And it'll say something, fun back, like, hi, Jerry, whatever. And then as I do my intense prompting, and cutting and pasting from documents, every once in a while I check in again. What's my name? And it says, Jerry. That's right, it is Jerry, you did tell me that. But keep going, because when your model spills its memory, meaning it starts to throw out some of the older memories, it will throw out, my name is Jerry. So at some point, when you say, what's my name? It'll say, I don't know your name, I'm an AI model, how can I know your name? And that's when you know that possibly for the last 3 minutes, the things that you were typing in and thinking it had some of the prior memory and context, it might have lost it. So we're gonna look a little closely in the next slide, but it's not infinite. So you got to think about your budgets when you're talking, because it will start to spill out, you can start to lose some of its older context, etc. So you want to keep things fresh is important. Or if that information is really that important, you might have to train the model so that it's permanently built in to its memory. So let's now finally give you a proper definition of what a token is. So a token in a language model is a segment of text, like a subword, that the model processes individually to understand and generate language. So one token is about 4 characters, 3/4 of a word on average. So 100 tokens would be about 75 words. So not quite 1-for-1 word, but about 4 characters, a small word. So my favorite Wayne Gretzky quote, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. If we were to tokenize that, it would come out as follows. And notice, when it chunks up the words to tokenize into these 4-ish character chunks, it'll do like space misses, space miss, or so in the AI's brain, space miss, so a space before the word miss is what I'm trying to say, is different than a space after the miss, which is different than miss all in caps, which is different than space miss all in caps, etc. So when I say it's different, you're going to get a different token value for those words, right? So when you prompt the model, the first thing it does is it'll create these tokenized vectors. Now, it can work on a tokenized vector doing vector math much better than it can use literal words, right? So the first thing it has to do is put it into a language it understands. And its neural network is filled with numbers, not with words, right? But it gives this illusion that it's words because there's this mapping. I did do a fun exercise, at least I thought it was fun, which was, I wanted to see if I can get, yes?
I was just gonna ask, how does it decide between you space miss or
It's
you
programmed.
space? Gotcha.
It's very precisely programmed how to break up words, which I naively found out that one AI model's token values for you may be 2675, but in Perplexity it's some other number, right? Perplexity might do you space, so it's based on the model's algorithm. It's not universal.
Gotcha.
So what I tried to do was make, if you type in my name to ChatGPT, it roughly knows I'm a guy from IBM. And I said, well, just imagine if I wanted to fall off the face of the planet, now ChatGPT knows who I am. How can I make it forget me? I said, I need to go and erase its tokens on me. So I had to find out what my tokens were in ChatGPT. And I had to figure out how to go and zap it from the memory. Turns out I don't have the model, it's running behind someone's firewall. But what you can do is you can set out, remember I mentioned ethical guardrails? So I created something called a bias packet, right? Which was all of the tokens that amount to things it shouldn't be doing. And by biasing, what it's doing is it's not eliminating the token. It's giving a weight to the token in a context. And what I did is I set every permutation I can think of Jerry Cuomo to a bias of negative 256 or something like 255. Which means when it was doing its prediction algorithm and it got to, I'm gonna say Jerry Cuomo, it said, but that's not the next word because the weight is very low. It's minus 2. So any other thing would come out. And it was funny because the model really wanted to say it was me. So it was making up unique spellings of my last name, which I then took and put it into the list and said, tokenize it, put it into the list, et cetera, et cetera. So tokens and weights are the way it works inside and how prompts work. There's a useful tool called GPT Tokenizer. And you can see, like it did the tokens, you can look at it separated and you can look at their values, et cetera. You can look at more. Like this example that it has with more text and see it's just an array. Right? So that's tokens, and there's a tool, and I used token forms a lot when I'm working, even doing prompt engineering. All right, so that's kind of how it sits behind the scenes. So, I guess they really won't find out about me now. So, I guess Waldo was all friends in the first picture with the alligator, but now it looks like he's going to be eaten. So there are some challenges. And there's pretty much classes on each of these challenges. So I'm just going to mention them and refer to some of the classes. So 3 to mention is bias. So our whole ethical module, we're going to talk about prompt attacks and bias and things like that. So describe a successful leader using diverse examples. If I was prompting, I would want to make sure I have it, trend ethically. Hallucination, again, we have a whole class on this, that the AI will, if it doesn't know the answer, it'll make up something that's plausible, but not true. So verify. So you can ask the model, verify your answer to try to avoid it from hallucinating. And counteracting adversarial prompting. Just like any other internet threat where you have SQL injection and you have prompt injection and all of that kind of stuff to avoid. And we're going to do a fun exercise with this thing called Gandalf. It's produced by a company called Lacra, and we're going to try to beat Gandalf by tricking it to give us passwords. All right, so it'll be an exercise in prompt engineering, but we're going to do it in the ethical module when we get there. So that's just to kind of tip it. All right, that is that. So take the quiz for chapter 5. Get ready to do some live prompting next week, and I'll stick around as I pack up. Have a great rest of the week. If you have any questions, yeah.